The origins of the Imperial Palace trace back to the final years of the Unification Wars on Terra, when the Emperor of Mankind began the transformation of the Himalayan mountains into a central seat of power. Prior to this period, the Himalayan mountain range had been ravaged by centuries of atomic warfare, orbital bombardments, and tectonic instability caused by the Age of Strife. Towering peaks were shattered, and underground vaults built by the techno-barbarian warlords had already dug deep into the earth. The Emperor did not simply construct a palace atop the ruins. He consumed, erased, and rebuilt the entire region into a fortress that defied geography. Its foundational megastructures stretch from the mountain summits down into the bedrock and beyond. Construction began before the Great Crusade and continued uninterrupted for over 10,000 years. Much of it still remains inaccessible or incomplete. At the core of the palace's origin was the Emperor's intent to create a singular nexus of human civilization. This was not merely a residence, it was a civilizational anchor, a command node for the Imperium, a psychic node for the Astronomicon, and a tomb for its god-king. The design integrated elements of ancient Terran empires, Mechanicum machine architectures, and psycho-reactive materials. Every inch of its construction was deliberate, symbolizing the Emperor's will to overwrite chaos and establish order. The palace grew in tandem with the Great Crusade. As new planets were brought into compliance, materials from across the stars were imported to reinforce its walls. Decorative features were often relics from extinct cultures, fused into the structure either as trophies or as warnings. The palace complex spans an area so large that it dwarfs entire continents. Its walls rise hundreds of meters, topped with macro turrets and void shield projectors. Dozens of citadels, vaults, and sanctums are embedded within its grounds. Subterranean levels extend down for kilometers, some dating back to the dark age of technology. The region is permanently locked in a no-fly zone, protected by countless defense systems, from orbital platforms to point defense batteries embedded in the terrain. At its highest point lies the Eternity Gate and the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor's golden throne resides. Around this heart lies a labyrinth of government ministries, ecclesiastical centres, scholastic repositories, and forbidden vaults that house secrets too dangerous to reveal. The military function of the Imperial Palace evolved drastically across the ages. During the Great Crusade, it was a secure base of operations. During the Horus Heresy, it became a battlefield. Following the Siege of Terra, it was reforged into an impenetrable fortress monastery. Custodian Guard patrol the inner sanctums. Regiments of the Imperial Fists constructed the original defences, which were later reinforced by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Within the walls reside thousands of elite troops who have never left the grounds. They are bred or recruited specifically for permanent duty within the palace. Most die without ever stepping beyond its perimeter. Custodians, genetically engineered warriors created by the Emperor himself, are the highest-ranking military presence in the palace. Unlike the Adeptus Astartes, they are not formed into legions but exist as an elite order known as the Adeptus Custodes. Each is a master of war, espionage, and diplomacy. Their duties are not confined to battle. They serve as bodyguards, investigators, and guardians of forbidden lore. Alongside them operate the Sisters of Silence, psychic nulls tasked with suppressing warp-based threats. Their presence ensures the palace remains one of the most psychically stable locations in the Imperium. Civilians within the palace serve in roles more complex than those in a standard hive. Generations of scribes, savants, archivists and labourers live and die within specialised sectors. Many never see natural light, working in data vaults where information from across the galaxy is processed. Others serve in the Administratum offices, managing the day-to-day operation of the Imperium's immense bureaucracy. Most are recruited through hereditary lines or as rewards for exceptional service. Despite the grandeur of their surroundings, conditions are often harsh. The endless corridors and towering chambers foster isolation and spiritual exhaustion. Many go mad from the sheer scale and pressure of duty. The hierarchy within the palace is a complex web. At its peak sits the High Lords of Terra, a council composed of 12 powerful representatives from the Imperium's core institutions. Though the Emperor remains the symbolic and spiritual apex, the High Lords govern in his name. Below them, countless suborders and departments operate in overlapping jurisdictions. The Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, and the Mechanicus all maintain enclaves within the palace. Conflicts of authority are common. Power struggles often occur behind sealed doors and beneath layers of coded protocol. Very few outsiders understand the true structure of command within the palace. The architecture reflects the Imperium's paradoxical nature. Gothic, industrial, and arcane styles blend into a singular visual language that defies rational design. Corridors twist at impossible angles. Some doors lead to chambers that no longer exist. Statues of forgotten saints line the halls, each dozens of meters tall, carved from materials no longer found in known space. Lighting is dim and gold-hued, filtered through stained glass and lumens powered by arcane plasma cells. Sound behaves unnaturally. Whispers carry for kilometers, while screams vanish within moments. The very air seems pressurized with psychic weight. The deeper one travels into the palace, the more unreality intrudes. Technology within the palace is both ancient and sacred. Warp-warded cogitators, data slate archives, and atmospheric regulators from the dark age of technology function alongside modern mechanicum constructs. Maintenance is a lifelong occupation for thousands of tech priests. Most systems cannot be replicated, only preserved. Some machines are sentient, others require regular human sacrifice. There are passageways accessible only via psychic imprint, or that shift based on time, ritual, or celestial alignment. Rumours persist of Blackstone nodes hidden beneath the palace, warding off the influence of the warp. None of these claims are officially confirmed. Rituals are integral to daily function. Doors may require the chanting of ancient litanies to open. Elevators operate only after incense is burned and prayers are recited. Even maintenance requires sacred rites. Every sector has a unique calendar based on its function. Time flows inconsistently across sections due to proximity to psychic infrastructure. Entire lifespans may be spent in transit within the palace without ever reaching the intended destination. This is by design. The Emperor envisioned the palace as a place where no one entity could ever claim full dominion, including himself. Among the most iconic structures within the palace is the throne room, or Sanctum Imperialis. Here resides the Golden Throne, an ancient techno-arcane device once designed as a webway interface and psychic gateway. Following the Emperor's wounding at the hands of Horus during the Siege of Terra, the throne was repurposed as a life support mechanism. Thousands of psychers are sacrificed daily to fuel its function. The Astronomicon, a psychic beacon visible across the galaxy, is projected from this node. It allows warp navigation and binds the Imperium together. Without it, human spacefaring civilization would collapse within weeks. Key figures tied to the palace include not only the Emperor and the Custodians, but individuals like Malcador the Sigillite, who once administered its inner workings. Others include high-ranking Inquisitors, Lord Commanders militant, and tech priests of Mars with access privileges to sacred vaults. These figures rarely appear in public. When they do, it is usually a sign of extreme crisis. Most business is conducted via servitor messengers, hololithic transmissions, or soul-bound intermediaries. The palace has been a stage for numerous conflicts. Most notably, the Siege of Terra saw the traitor legions led by Horus attempt to breach its walls. The battle lasted for months and resulted in the death of billions. Defensive lines were shattered and rebuilt multiple times. The Eternity Gate was nearly breached. It was here that the Emperor and Horus fought their final battle. Since then, incursions have been rare but not unknown. Demonic infestations, internal rebellions, and Xenos infiltration attempts have all occurred, often ending before the wider Imperium is even aware. The Custodes and the Inquisition ensure such threats are neutralized in absolute silence. Even today, the Imperial Palace remains a paradox. It is both a tomb and a throne, a machine and a shrine, a memory of what was and a warning of what must never return. Its halls echo with silence, yet they are never truly still. Beneath its foundation lies not only the weight of the Imperium, but the buried truths of its birth, its betrayals, and its continued existence against the tide of the universe. The social dynamics within the Imperial Palace are unlike any other location in the Imperium. This is not due to luxury or privilege, but rather the immense density of hierarchy, ritual, and ideological pressure that permeates every aspect of life within its walls. Civilians living within the palace are subjected to centuries of inherited roles. Lineages are tied to very specific functions, such as data filtration, prayer maintenance, or environmental calibration, and it is not uncommon for a single family to perform the same task for dozens of generations without interruption. These hereditary positions are not questioned. In most cases, the rituals involved in the work are so complex and semi-religious in nature that deviation is considered both heretical and dangerous. Most citizens of the palace never leave its grounds. Entire life cycles, from birth, education, labour, and death, occur in sealed sectors. Access to even adjacent regions often requires bureaucratic clearance, genetic identification, and sometimes the intervention of a custodian or Adeptus Mechanicus overseer. The result is that most sectors develop microcultures with their own dialects, symbolic systems, and traditions. These distinctions are tolerated by the wider governance structure as long as they do not interfere with function. In some cases, they are encouraged, since they limit mobility and reduce the chance of ideological contamination between departments. Children born in the palace are often assigned into vocational tracks within weeks of birth. In facilities known as occupational sanctuaries, infants are screened for reflex speed, memorization capacity, psychic potential, and other traits relevant to specific ministries. Most who fail these tests are culled or repurposed as servitors. Those who pass are inducted into specialized educational programs that often begin before the child can speak. These programs emphasize obedience, memory retention, and religious conformity above critical thinking. Language is taught through liturgical Gothic, and moral instruction is drawn exclusively from imperial dogma. By the time a citizen reaches adulthood, their worldview is entirely shaped by their function and role. Even questioning the nature of the emperor is unthinkable. Religion within the palace is not a matter of choice. The ecclesiarchy maintains countless shrines and chapels across all accessible levels. Daily worship is mandated and tracked, with attendance often recorded through biometric scans or servitor observation. Sermons are transmitted directly through vox nodes embedded in walls. Failure to listen can result in disciplinary action. In some regions, worship is continuous. Chanting is sustained by overlapping shifts of devotees. The presence of the emperor in the Golden Throne is considered a physical and spiritual reality. Entire theological branches are devoted to interpreting the fluctuations in the Astronomicon, or the rare movements in the throne's mechanisms as divine messages. Despite the theocratic rigidity, there are layers of philosophical diversity hidden beneath the surface. The Mechanicum priests embedded in the palace often follow the cult Mechanicus rather than the imperial creed. The Adeptus Custodes maintain their own internal belief system, centered on loyalty to the emperor as a being beyond all theological categorization. The Inquisition operates on its own doctrinal logic, where truth and heresy are often weaponized according to political need. These overlapping ideologies can produce tension, but such conflicts are rarely public. Disagreements are resolved through veiled negotiations, coded language, or force when necessary. The technological infrastructure of the palace is among the most advanced in the galaxy, rivaled only by Mars and Blackstone structures. However, this technology is not distributed evenly. Certain halls are illuminated by arcane plasma arrays that have operated without maintenance for over 10,000 years, while others rely on torches or chemical lumens. Some data terminals are connected to the noosphere or the cognita net, allowing for instantaneous information transfer across thousands of kilometers. Others require punch card input and mechanical dials. This technological inconsistency is partly the result of the palace's layered construction, where different eras of advancement were built atop one another. The overlapping systems are managed by armies of tech adepts who specialize in interfacing with specific strata of machinery. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains permanent facilities within the palace, including research vaults, fabrication labs, and sacred forges. Their role is dual: to preserve the function of sacred technologies and to analyze forbidden devices retrieved from across the galaxy. Not all of this work is disclosed to the Administratum or the Inquisition. Within certain sub-levels, sealed by both psychic wards and encrypted access keys, lie artifacts from the Dark Age of technology, Xenos origin, or unknown sources entirely. These items are not studied in the open. They are observed, dissected, or even worshipped, depending on the tech priest's alignment within the wider Mechanicus dogma. The custodians have their own forges, armories, and genetic laboratories within the palace. These facilities are closed to all outsiders, including most other Imperial agencies. Within them, new wargear is crafted not only with engineering precision, but also with spiritual ritual. Each Guardian's armor is bespoke, its components shaped by both machine and hand. Gene seed and cellular archives are maintained for their order alone, and unlike the Astartes, their genetic enhancements are sustained individually rather than through batch cultivation. The few medici who serve in these facilities are not truly Mechanicum nor Imperial. They are custodian-trained specialists answerable only to the Captain General. Weaponry and defense systems within the palace reflect its dual nature as both fortress and shrine. Anti-orbital missile banks are embedded in the spires, some disguised as statues or monuments. Interior corridors are lined with auto-turrets, gravitic suppression fields, and chemical incinerators designed to neutralize hostile infiltration. Reinforced sanctums can be sealed hermetically, isolating regions in seconds. The palace also contains psionic defenses, devices that emit null waves or warp-inhibiting fields across entire sectors. These defenses are not always active, as their operation can have unintended side effects on surrounding systems or personnel. Their use is determined by custodian command or, in rare cases, direct intervention from the High Lords. One of the palace's more arcane elements is its use of psychic architecture. Certain halls, doorways, and sanctuaries are designed to respond to the mental state or soul print of the individual passing through. These psychic reactive structures are relics from the Emperor's early work on the Webway project, and are not reproducible by current Mechanicus technology. They serve not only as safeguards, but also as navigational aids for those attuned to their presence. Unauthorized individuals often find these regions inaccessible, either through disorientation, physical blockage, or psychic rejection. It is rumored that some custodians can manipulate these structures consciously, rerouting corridors or revealing hidden vaults at will. Hierarchy within the palace does not operate solely on rank or office. Proximity to the Emperor's will, interpreted through symbolic, ritual, or telepathic means, grants a form of implicit authority. The custodes often act with this authority, intervening in political disputes without formal justification. The High Lords themselves are cautious when engaging directly with the custodes, recognizing that their mandate comes not from appointment, but from their perpetual proximity to the throne. This creates a complex dance of power, where formal structures coexist with invisible lines of influence and unspoken precedent. It is a place where political survival depends as much on symbolic obedience as on actual efficacy. In terms of behavioral norms, life within the palace is marked by hyperdiscipline, symbolic communication, and omnipresent surveillance. Servitor drones observe all public corridors. Vox spirits record and archive conversations. Walls themselves can reveal or obscure individuals depending on access protocols. As a result, speech becomes layered. Individuals speak encoded phrases, double meanings, or sanction quotations from religious texts. Body language is equally regulated. A bowed head, a hand gesture, or a moment of silence can carry significant political weight. Misreading such cues can end a career or a life. Discipline is enforced not through mass executions but through precision disappearance. Individuals who fail their duties, express doubt or attract unwanted attention often vanish overnight. Their sectors receive no explanation. Their names are erased from official logs. Sometimes these individuals are repurposed, reborn as lobotomized servitors, or remanded to deep vault interrogation by the Inquisition. Other times, they are simply absorbed into the psychic architecture, their consciousness converted into residual data within the palace's vast archives. These methods serve both as punishment and deterrent. No one within the palace forgets who they work for. The infrastructure of the Imperial Palace is so immense and layered that the very concept of space becomes distorted within its depths. Its construction spans tens of thousands of years, incorporating segments from multiple historical epochs. Each layer, vault, and corridor carries with it architectural and cultural remnants from the era in which it was built. This includes foundational vaults carved out by the Emperor's early gene-forged labourers, reinforced with stone harvested from the moon, and reinforced again centuries later with adamantium plating smelted in the furnaces of Mars. In time, these levels were buried under newer expansions, often without full integration. The result is an increasingly fractured spatial logic where some corridors lead to forgotten sanctums and others loop into themselves endlessly. This spatial inconsistency is not accidental. Certain segments of the palace are deliberately designed to be confusing, not only to dissuade infiltration but also to trap, delay or isolate unauthorized personnel. Navigational systems are intentionally limited. Cartographic data is closely held by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and even then only available by sector. Custodians are one of the few groups who possess an intuitive awareness of the palace's shifting layouts, derived from training, psychic orientation, and direct ancestral knowledge passed through millennia. They do not rely on maps. Their internal models of the palace are updated continuously through ceremony, ritual walkings, and coded pattern analysis. Technology and architecture within the palace are not only protective, they are reactive. Certain systems are psychically attuned and only activate in the presence of authorized minds. Halls remain dark and sealed until approached by designated individuals. Doors may not open through mechanical means but through symbolic action, genetic signature, or psychic resonance. Light itself may change tone depending on who is walking the corridor. In some areas, the very geometry of the space seems to shift when no one is observing. These fluctuations are rarely commented on, not because they are common, but because acknowledging them can mark an individual for scrutiny. At the core of this living architecture is the Golden Throne. Though often spoken of as a life support device, the throne is a fusion of multiple lost technologies, psycho-reactive materials, and mechanisms designed for tasks far beyond its current usage. Originally built to access the webway, the throne served as a gateway interface to a human-built dimension of ordered warp travel. After the failure of the webway project and the mortal wounding of the Emperor, it was converted into a tomb engine, keeping the Emperor's physical form alive through incomprehensible means. The full architecture of the throne spans deep into the bedrock, forming a vertical stack of reactors, psychic channels, and unknown subsystems. Maintenance requires thousands of Adeptus Mechanicus personnel working in shifts, supported by conveyor-fed psycho-sacrifices harvested from across the Imperium. The Golden Throne is located in the Sanctum Imperialis, a chamber of such scale that its roof is lost in artificial mist and arc lumen haze. The throne itself sits atop a plinth of black marble and auramite, surrounded by concentric rings of plasma conduit, null fields, and sacred inscriptions etched with ionizing lasers. Custodians guard the inner sanctum with an intensity that exceeds even battlefield readiness. Entry is forbidden to all others except under the highest orders. Even inquisitors are restricted to the outer thresholds. On rare occasions, high-ranking Adeptus Mechanicus Magi are allowed brief access to consult the throne systems. These audiences are silent, clinical, and often mentally devastating. Many leave with neural scars or inexplicable memory lapses. Beyond the sanctum lies the Eternity Gate, one of the most fortified portals in the Imperium. This massive structure serves as the final threshold between the outer palace and the Emperor's personal domain. Its surface is adorned with relief sculptures depicting scenes of the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and metaphysical allegories of sacrifice and dominion. Embedded into its mechanisms are multi-phase locks, void shield redundancies, and machine spirits that evaluate the worthiness of any who approach. During the Siege of Terra, the Eternity Gate became the focal point of the final defense, where the Emperor's personal guard clashed with the forces of chaos. It is now permanently sealed, opened only under protocols that have not been invoked in over 10,000 years. The deeper sections of the palace are the most restricted. These include the Vaults of Rhetoric, the Chamber of Dissonance, the Time-Worn Refractory, and others whose names are unknown to most of the Imperium. These locations are sealed not only by physical barriers but by layers of interdiction that include psychic wards, temporal displacement fields, and programmed oblivion agents. Devices that erase memory and awareness of their presence. Some vaults are rumoured to house remnants of pre-imperial civilizations, failed experiments from the Primarch project, or even captured entities from the warp. There is no confirmed record of what lies within these spaces. Only the Emperor, and perhaps the Custodian Order in its deepest traditions, holds that knowledge. Throughout the palace, one finds recurring elements of symbolism and metaphysical reinforcement. Glyphs, sigils, and ritual diagrams are not merely decorative. They serve to anchor the psychic stability of the structure. The palace exists partially within the material realm and partially within a tightly bound warp presence. The Emperor's psychic output affects time, perception, and memory. To counter this, wards are embedded into walls, sanctified materials are used in flooring, and acoustic harmonizers resonate in certain frequencies to stabilize local cognition. These features are not static. They must be recalibrated continuously. Whole divisions of specialists serve as harmonic maintainers, adjusting the palace's atmospheric and psychic alignment based on seasonal flux and external astronomical patterns. The Imperial Palace also includes a massive transportation network. This includes subsurface transit lines, gravitic lift channels, and teleportation nodes. Most movement occurs underground, far from the surface structures visible in Imperial propaganda. Transportation between sectors can take hours or even days, depending on the level of security clearance, interference from warp fluctuations, and the status of internal security protocols. In certain cases, entire departments are moved en masse via pressurized transport conduits. Some routes are one-way by design, intended for personnel who will never return. The palace does not encourage redundancy or backtracking. Everything moves forward, deeper, and inward. Environmental control is another core feature of the palace's infrastructure. Its interior climate is managed through a combination of artificial atmospheric regulators, adaptive microclimates, and natural geological channels from deep beneath the Earth's crust. Some regions replicate Terran ecosystems for psychological balance. Others are sterilized zones where only vacuum-suited personnel may enter. Temperature, humidity, and even oxygen content can be adjusted by command protocols issued by the Custodes or the Mechanicus. However, these systems are not always stable. Failures in environmental management have caused ice storms in administrative archives, thermal meltdowns in theological sanctuaries, and even brief gravitational inversions in secondary vaults. These incidents are treated with secrecy and erased from the records within hours. Maintenance of the palace is a never-ending task. It is performed by an uncounted workforce of menials, servitors, tech adepts, and engineered maintenance clones. Their duties range from replacing cracked floor tiles to recalibrating ancient reactor nodes. Some tasks are so obscure that the workers do not understand their purpose. They simply perform the action passed down through coded instruction. In many cases, the instructions themselves are sacred texts, and the tools used are sanctified objects. This blurring of function and faith is deliberate. It ensures absolute compliance and limits intellectual deviation. Those who begin to question the purpose of their work are either reassigned, mind-scrubbed, or removed entirely. Among the most enigmatic aspects of the palace is the concept of the inner chamber, an alleged room or network of rooms where the Emperor's consciousness occasionally interacts with the material world. No official maps record its location. Some say it lies above the throne, others claim it is beneath the earth, hidden behind layers of time-locked wards. A few fragments from recovered Mechanicus logs suggest the chamber may not exist in physical space at all, but in a suspended psychospatial realm accessible only to specific souls or through precise ritual alignment. Whatever the case, no living record has confirmed entry into the inner chamber. Its existence remains one of the most heavily classified mysteries of the Imperium. Those who serve within the palace speak of a phenomenon known only as the resonance. It is described not as a sound, but as a pressure that moves through the walls, the floor, and even the air itself. It is strongest near the throne, but can be felt in distant sectors during specific times or astronomical events. Some believe it is the echo of the Emperor's will, his heartbeat pulsing through the architecture. Others consider it a byproduct of the psychic strain required to maintain the Astronomicon. Regardless of its origin, the resonance affects sleep patterns, decision-making, and emotional stability. Entire departments rotate shifts to avoid prolonged exposure. In all its structure and function, the Imperial Palace is not simply the administrative capital of the Imperium, it is a metaphysical anchor designed to sustain a dying god, repel the forces of chaos, and maintain the illusion of unity across a collapsing galactic empire. Its walls hold the breath of history and the weight of expectation. It is a relic of a dream long since fractured, and a machine that continues to function because no other alternative has been permitted to exist. Every hallway, chamber, and sanctum is a reminder that the Imperium does not operate by logic or law. It operates by the unrelenting gravity of belief. The earliest documented records of the Imperial Palace, as preserved by the Adeptus Administratum, begin with the foundation of the Unification era in the 31st millennium, specifically around the year 30,000. The earliest Mechanicus schematic records, predating formal Imperium standardization, describe the region of the Himalasian plateau as a fortified stronghold, already under extensive construction even before the conclusion of the Unification Wars. These documents, recovered from pre-imperial data vaults and later canonized by the Lex Mechanicus of the Administratum, classify the area under high-priority terraforming and strategic command development, Terra Alpha 0. In the earliest years, the location was not referred to as the Imperial Palace, but as the Proto-Command Bastion. The Adeptus Mechanicus engineers of Mars were initially granted limited access to the site under direct order from the Emperor, a situation considered highly irregular due to the Emperor's typical refusal to allow external oversight of his own projects. This early collaboration yielded several classified documents now stored in the vault's Foss grid, which confirm that the original structure was centered around a subterranean command array and psychoactive node designed for planetary-scale operations. This would later evolve into the foundations of what would power the Astronomicon. As the Great Crusade began, formal naming conventions were applied by the Administratum to the developing complex, which had by then exceeded several thousand square kilometers. In the year 31,000 Year 1, the term Imperial Palace first appeared in official High Gothic correspondence sent from the Emperor's transcontinental court, addressed to the High Command of Segmentum Solar. That same year, early records show the first documented arrivals of administrative staff, logistics officers, and junior scribes assigned to the complex. Census fragments estimate that the civilian presence within the palace, at that point, was limited to approximately 40,000 personnel, mostly drawn from select Terran noble houses and veteran unification regiments. The Adeptus Mechanicus's records from this era also confirm the arrival of specialized forge teams to install sub-planetary plasma relay networks, reactor cores, and warp buffering systems. These early installations were experimental and rarely duplicated elsewhere. The palace became a testing ground for arcane technologies lost to time, some drawn from the Age of Strife, others suspected to be remnants of the Dark Age of technology. Several of these systems would later become irreplaceable due to lack of replication capability, resulting in the assignment of permanent tech priest sects to their preservation and continuous calibration. During the Great Crusade between year 31,000 and year 31,100, the palace was subject to a rapid phase of horizontal and vertical expansion. Official Administratum construction logs indicate the approval of 72 high-order expansion projects during this period. Each required approval from the Emperor or his proxy, usually issued through the hand of Malcador the Sigillite. These expansion efforts included the Sanctum Luminara, the core data sanctuaries, and the throne support infrastructure that would one day connect to the webway interface beneath the Golden Throne. The period of the Great Crusade also saw the first arrival of legionary personnel to the palace, although only in a ceremonial capacity. The 1st, 2nd, 6th and 9th legions rotated small honour guards for select imperial ceremonies. These rotations were extremely limited in scope and usually occurred under conditions of exceptional security. The vast majority of the legions Astartes remained active in extraterritorial campaigns and were discouraged from spending extended time near the Emperor's direct seat of power. Nonetheless, Mechanicus reports from the Vaults of Spatial Harmony document several internal stress tests performed on the palace's defences during these early Astartes arrivals, indicating a persistent evaluation of the complex's ability to withstand post-human infiltration or rebellion. The most critical documented turning point in the palace's history, at least from the Administratum's bureaucratic viewpoint, was the beginning of the Webway project. Records from year 31,120 indicate the sudden and uncharacteristically opaque redirection of thousands of Mechanicus personnel into the substructural foundations beneath the throne chamber. The reason given in most surface-level documentation was listed as psychoenergetic utility development, but deeper analysis from the Lex Mechanical audit of 31,122, conducted decades later, revealed layered false entries, missing maintenance logs, and erased travel permits for high-value personnel. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in contrast, began its own documentation of anomalies during this period. Several high-level magi reported spatial irregularities, energy readings outside of expected tolerances, and the activation of mechanisms that could not be attributed to known components. These findings were sealed under sigil-level restrictions, requiring quadruple authority verification. Decades later, following the heresy, these files would be quietly copied and relocated to Mechanicus enclaves on Mars and Saturn's moons, under the pretense of standard data redundancy. As the Horus heresy approached, the palace was subjected to further classification shifts. The Administratum's internal designations for certain palace sectors began to change, reflecting new levels of restricted access. Sectors previously available to high-level scribes were suddenly locked under Omega seal. Some departments were absorbed by custodian authority with no explanation. Transport corridors were rerouted or permanently sealed. These events are well documented in official records from year 31,150 through 31,153, although without commentary. The Mechanicus, during this same time frame, recorded a massive increase in the demand for subterranean stabilization, null field generators, and anti-warp circuitry. The Siege of Terra marked the highest point of cross-institutional coordination ever recorded between the Administratum and the Mechanicus with respect to the palace. During the battle, the Departmenta Munitorum, in cooperation with elements of the Imperial Fists and the Saturnine Gate fabrication clade, issued real-time supply and construction commands under direct threat conditions. Massive quantities of adamantium, ferrocrete, munitions, and support systems were redirected from across Terra to reinforce the Eternity Gate, the Gorgon Arc Line, and the Inner Bastion vaults. Contemporary battle records, now archived within the Administratum's Monumentum Conflictus, confirm the deployment of last resort systems. These included psycho-reactive mortars, plasma net spires, and controlled warp charge expulsion devices, all technologies long since banned or hidden after the heresy. One file in particular, labelled Terra Siege Prime 47, describes the activation of a failsafe within the palace's foundations that caused a 12-hour gravitic inversion in the outer sanctum, crushing tens of thousands of invading traitor forces. No blueprint of this device has ever been found. In the wake of the Emperor's entombment in the Golden Throne, the palace underwent a dramatic shift in status. The Administratum officially declared it not only the Imperium's capital, but also its metaphysical and theological centre. Every subsequent structural alteration required tripartite approval from the High Lords of Terra, the Adeptus Custodes, and the Mechanicus. All personnel assignments to the palace from this point forward were designated as permanent sacred duty, with reassignment or leave made legally impossible unless approved at the highest levels. Throughout the 10 millennia that followed, the Administratum documented over 300 reconstruction and reinforcement campaigns. Each was initiated in response to specific incidents: internal collapses, warp surges, unknown intrusions, and occasional recorded phenomena such as mass temporal overlaps or reactive space inversion events. These are terms not typically used elsewhere in Imperial documentation, and they remain undefined in most official lexicons. Their presence in the record suggests events beyond conventional explanation, perhaps related to the continued psychic output of the Emperor, the proximity to the warp, or the legacy of failed webway stabilization. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus maintained what they referred to as the Continuum Stabilization Protocol. This internal doctrine classified the palace as a Type Omega Singularity node, a structure that, due to its psychic density and historical layering, existed simultaneously in multiple semi-stable states. While the Administratum focused on administrative throughput and personnel management, the Mechanicus continued to monitor and maintain the deeper systems with increasing caution. Their archival logs from the Fortis Reductor Vaults list at least 22 systems that no longer respond to input but remain active. These are often referred to as ghost subsystems or godless engines. Their purpose is unknown, and attempts to disable them have universally failed. By the dawn of the 41st millennium, the Imperial Palace was no longer just a command centre. It had become a machine in its own right, self-sustaining, layered in autonomous processes and governed by thousands of nested protocols. The Adeptus Administratum manages its surface bureaucracy, scheduling millions of personnel, overseeing tithe requests, and organising faith processions. The Adeptus Mechanicus oversees its technological and metaphysical health, ensuring that the Emperor's throne does not fail and that the hidden mechanisms deep beneath the earth remain stable. Together, these institutions form the outer shell of the palace's administration, though neither can fully claim to understand the full scope of what the palace has become. In the centuries following the Siege of Terra, as the scars of the heresy still burned across the stars, the Imperial Palace entered what the Administratum would refer to as the era of stabilization. It was during this time, specifically from the year 31,150 to 31,200, that the palace's post-siege restructuring efforts reached their zenith. Administratum records from the Chronomancer Office, Task Force Terra Reclamation, list over 100 major sector realignments within the first 2 decades alone. These were not merely repairs, but comprehensive reworkings of damaged infrastructure, reshaped according to evolving political, theological and logistical requirements. The Mechanicus had by this period assumed near total control of all substructural systems within the palace. The post-heresy power restructuring saw the Treaty of Mars reaffirmed under dire terms, allowing the tech priests to occupy and maintain any system necessary for sustaining the Emperor's life and the continuity of the Astronomicon. Documentation from this era reveals the first widespread deployment of what were termed right-bound engine attendants, essentially cybernetic teams grown and conditioned solely for repetitive, high-risk machine spirit appeasement rituals. These units became permanent fixtures in palace subsectors and have been continuously replaced across the millennia due to rapid attrition and psycho-spiritual decay. The Adeptus Administratum responded to this expansion of Mechanicus' presence by increasing layers of bureaucratic filtration New sub-departments were founded specifically to track Mechanicus operations. These included the Office of Subterranean Audit, the Liturgical Technography Division, and the Null Field Oversight Annex. Each office was tasked not with controlling the Mechanicus, which was impossible, but with documenting, interpreting, and cross-referencing their work for pattern recognition and anomaly logging. These departments developed their own internal cultures, languages, and lexicons, many of which remain indecipherable to outsiders. Some employ numerology and theological cross-reference systems to track energy flow and causality within the palace itself. By the dawn of the 32nd millennium, an additional threat emerged in the form of psychic destabilization within the deeper vaults of the throne complex. Mechanicus records marked these events as alpha-grade spatial convulsions, while Administratum documents refer to them simply as cascades. During these phenomena, parts of the palace experienced temporary warping of geometry, gravity, and perception. Time within affected sectors slowed, accelerated, or fractured entirely. The cause of these events was never fully determined, though proximity to the Golden Throne and the constant psychic demand of the Astronomicon was the primary theory. A Mechanicus directive labelled Directive Auric 13 resulted in the creation of a specialised maintenance cult, the Chronosealed Engineers, whose rituals are based on temporal resynchronization and metachronometric harmonics. Administratum logs from the same era list unexpected disappearances among ranking personnel, with entire departments reportedly erased from the chain of command. Some were later found operating in sealed vaults with no memory of reassignment. Others were never located. These events prompted the foundation of the Memory Integrity Office, a specialised bureau dedicated to tracking continuity errors in record-keeping and personnel logs. This office continues to operate to this day, and it maintains its own internal classification of events labelled continuity anomalies. The majority of these anomalies are flagged as unresolvable but stable, indicating a passive tolerance of distortion, so long as broader palace functions remain intact. The 13th Black Crusade brought renewed concern regarding palace defences. In the year 41,750, the Administratum authorised a full audit of internal fortifications. Their findings, contained in the vault-locked Terra Fortification Ledger 749, concluded that while surface defences remained functionally optimal, the internal layout had grown overly complex. Travel times between strategic sectors were found to have tripled since the heresy due to layered expansions and sealed zones. Recommendations were submitted for a redesign of the Inner Bastion transit network. These requests were never approved. The Custodes and Mechanicus vetoed all proposals, citing unknown systemic dependencies and potential metaphysical consequences of reconfiguration. The palace's ability to host imperial religious observances also evolved during this period. The ecclesiarchy began formalising pilgrimage paths within the palace grounds, culminating in the holy route of the Sanctum Imperialis. Administratum documents show that between the years 41,780 and 41,805, over 2 million pilgrims entered the outer palace sectors annually. The influx was unsustainable. Infrastructure failed to support the demand, resulting in stampedes, spiritual madness, and in one case, mass delusion triggered by prolonged exposure to warp echoes near the southern reliquary chambers. The Administratum limited access shortly afterward, citing a formal declaration titled Secular Sanctum Decree 791, which restricted pilgrimage rights to a highly vetted class of nobles, cardinals, and Adepta Sororitas escorts. The Adeptus Mechanicus in turn responded to the presence of unauthorized organics in high-risk zones by activating dormant servitor sentries across multiple corridors. These units had not been seen since the heresy. Unlike standard patrol servitors, they operated with independent threat recognition protocols and multi-spectrum targeting systems. When questioned about the deployment, Mechanicus representatives refused to provide clarification, only confirming that such responses were pre-coded contingencies embedded during Design Phase 0. Additional events further complicated administration. In the year 41,812, a psychic shockwave emerged from the throne complex, disrupting communication across over 70 palace sectors. No official reason was ever issued. The Administratum's internal report, labelled Incident Designation Radiant Spiral, suggested a failed transition of a particularly powerful psyker into the throne's daily sacrificial cycle. Meanwhile, Mechanicus logs record no deviation in input-output energy metrics, but note that 17 automated null generators activated simultaneously, which should have been impossible under standard load balancing. Both institutions archived the incident separately. No joint investigation was permitted. These cumulative anomalies and frictions have led to the current state of mutually tolerated dysfunction. The Adeptus Administratum maintains the official front-facing operation of the palace, archiving orders, managing personnel, and conducting formal affairs on behalf of the High Lords. The Mechanicus, meanwhile, works beneath and around them, maintaining ancient systems they do not fully understand and which cannot be shut down. While publicly cooperative, the relationship between the two institutions is marked by subtle sabotage, misfiled documentation, and rituals designed to obscure as much as reveal. Both sides know that the palace is beyond full comprehension. What neither side will admit is that they operate under constant fear, not of the outside galaxy, but of the palace itself. Its deeper layers resist mapping. Some regions respond with hostility to repeated scans. Elevators will reject passengers. Doorways refuse to open for days. Vox spirits report impossible static patterns. The walls echo phrases never spoken. In these moments, neither bureaucracy nor logic offers safety. The custodians alone move with calm confidence, and even they walk with weapons drawn in certain corridors. It is in this unspoken territory, somewhere between administration and machine spirit, that the true nature of the Imperial Palace resides. To the Adeptus Administratum, it is a temple bureaucracy sustained through endless data flow and historical inertia. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, it is a dead god's engine that still hums with preternatural purpose. To both, it is a labyrinth of rituals, redundancies, and redacted truths, alive in ways that official documents will never dare admit. The later records of the Adeptus Administratum reveal a shift from imperial centralization to preservation through redundancy. By the time of the Indomitus era, year 42,000 and beyond, the palace had evolved into a self-contained administrative organism, bloated with protocol, ritual, and insulated logic. Layers of bureaucracy acted as insulation from outside threats, but also prevented effective introspection. Administratum scribes recorded that over 90% of interdepartmental requests within the palace were never fulfilled. Instead, most were redirected, lost, or reinterpreted into unrelated outcomes through doctrinal filters. The palace no longer processed orders, it processed belief, repetition, and inertia. By this point, the palace's registry codices had swollen beyond control. The Lexi-Tithe audit conducted in year 42,017 indicated over 30 billion active personnel records within the palace alone. The Mechanicus provided infrastructure support in the form of self-maintaining data libraries, subsurface matrix vaults where cognition engines sifted the accumulated informational sediment. These engines operated with minimal oversight, occasionally surfacing records centuries out of context, sometimes inventing bureaucratic positions that no longer existed. Attempts to decommission these systems failed. They were found to be linked to essential life support protocols buried beneath later construction layers. Shutting them down would disable thousands of unrelated systems. Administratum archival staff, aware of these failures, developed new layers of ritualized documentation to obscure the collapse of control. These included the use of recursive citation codes, self-referencing orders, and theological indexing, methods that ensured no one entity could fully track the decisions of the palace. From a functional standpoint, this was self-sabotage. But from an ideological perspective, it preserved the illusion of stability. The palace, after all, could not be seen to fail. To admit error would be to question the Emperor's plan. Thus, every fault was buried in redundant protocol, every collapse named a doctrinal evolution. the Adeptus Mechanicus followed a parallel trajectory. By the dawn of the Great Rift, their attention shifted from preservation to containment. In year 42,011, Mechanicus expeditionary logs note the sealing of 3 entire subvault complexes beneath the core sanctum. The official reason was structural instability, but audio fragments retrieved by Lex Mechanics in a later forensic review described low-frequency hums, data loop contamination, and psychoactive bleed-through. One file included an observation from a junior tech adept. The walls began reciting our own maintenance logs, in our own voices before we spoke. These entries were redacted under an emergency Skitarii lockdown, never to be discussed again. Another major event recorded by both factions occurred in the year 42,015. Known in Mechanicus files as Protocol Tertius Null, it involved the silent failure of several support systems surrounding the throne. Dozens of cogitators ceased transmitting, and for 7 minutes the Astronomican's signal fluctuated at 1% amplitude. The Adeptus Administratum declared the event an illusion of mass hysteria. The Mechanicus insisted it was a test run of failover systems. Neither explanation matched surviving telemetry logs. Custodian observation logs from that same hour were sealed under executive authority and never submitted for audit. What happened remains unknown, but the changes implemented afterward included triple redundant containment rights and the rerouting of over 10,000 tech adepts to defensive maintenance roles. Meanwhile, the Administratum's approach to internal conflict took a more esoteric form. With hundreds of overlapping sectors under contradictory leadership, ideological sects began to form within the ranks. These were not political in the traditional sense but theological, competing interpretations of how best to serve the throne, to interpret data to prey over malfunctioning machines. The division of lucid silence advocated for blind transcription, believing the less one understands the record, the more pure its truth. The doctrine of recursive flame insisted that errors must be copied until no one could identify the original mistake. The Administratum's official stance on these sects was one of managed tolerance, as long as output quotas were met. The Mechanicus was no more unified. Internal schisms erupted over access to forgotten vaults, the purpose of ancient mechanisms, and the use of machine spirits extracted from dead Astartes dreadnoughts. The Unspoken Disciples, a secretive order operating beneath the eastward energy chambers, was caught transmitting entropic signal patterns to palace defences, allegedly as part of a test. The incident was sealed. No punishment was recorded. Instead, the chamber was sealed and relabeled as Non-Entry Zone 980C. Several Mechanicus logs claim this location is still broadcasting a pulse, untraceable, without source, and without variation, since the day of the incident. Administrative records from this period reveal a final haunting trend. More and more often, requests filed to specific offices were returned marked not recognised. These were not lost, misfiled, or rejected. They were answered precisely with that message. This response began to appear across multiple sectors: Mechanicus data queries, supply requisitions, even spiritual petition logs. The entities replying to these messages were never identified. All that was confirmed is that someone, or something, was answering them. The phenomenon became known among high-level Lex Mechanics as silent adjudication. Orders sent afterward were no longer followed. Instead, entire command structures simply adapted, uncertain whether they were being corrected, overridden, or quietly replaced. By the mid-Indomitus Crusade, both the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus had adopted a common unspoken rule: do not dig too deep. Most of the palace operated without oversight, self-sustaining through nested routines that no longer responded to modification. The palace did not need to be understood. It needed to continue. Both institutions formalized this approach through sacred redundancies. Orders were written in triplicate, filed through void-sealed scripters, and cross-referenced with non-existent departments to ensure plausible deniability. The focus was no longer accuracy, it was inertia. Despite this, the palace endured. Its systems functioned. The Astronomicon continued to burn, Messages still passed through Vox relays. Personnel were born, worked, died. The bureaucracy fed itself. The machines obeyed, even if no one knew why. And at its centre, the Golden Throne remained lit, a constant beacon in the warp, whether by will, momentum, or something no longer human. As the records close on the Administratum's view of the palace, one message is repeated again and again in their closing notes, marginalia and footnotes. Always handwritten, always unofficial, always uncited. The palace works. Do not ask how. The Inquisition's documentation of the Imperial Palace begins not with construction records, architectural schematics, or ceremonial accounts, but with silence. The oldest surviving inquisitorial records on the subject, filed under the Ordo Hereticus and dated to the year 31,800, carry only a single line. Access denied under tri-seal authority. Palace integrity classified as existentially sensitive. No images, no sensor readouts, no field notes, just silence, followed by the deletion of the operative's identity from the record. In practice, however, the Inquisition has never ceased its observation of the palace. It simply avoids acknowledging that such surveillance occurs. What follows in its archives is not a standard investigation of a location, but a slowly accumulating body of incident logs, death declarations, and psychological deterioration reports, each involving personnel who came into contact with the palace in ways deemed abnormal. These reports are scattered across millennia, fragmented in form and labelled with terminology inconsistent even by inquisitorial standards. Most do not use the term Imperial Palace at all. Instead, they refer to it as the core, the shell, or in several rare cases, the hollow beacon. One of the first confirmed inquisitorial operations inside the palace occurred in the years immediately following the siege of Terra. A small detachment of the Order Malleus, operating under the command of Inquisitor Absalon Vecht, was granted provisional access to the lower sanctums beneath the Astronomican's energy lattice. The request was framed as a warp field integrity audit. Vecht's reports were classified level oblivion, but redacted fragments later leaked into Mechanicus Cogitator storage caches indicate a reference to stagnant warp resonance in the floor matter and presence of folded perception vectors in elevator transitions. Vecht's final transmission simply stated, "Reality is incomplete here. I advise sealing." His entire retinue disappeared. The sector was subsequently designated as a Custodes-only zone. During the Age of Apostasy, when civil war tore through the heart of the Imperium, the Inquisition took greater interest in the palace's role as a potential vector for instability. At least 4 separate Ordo Hereticus cells attempted to infiltrate the ecclesiarchal annexes embedded along the palace's southern edge. These efforts were partially successful, and several terabytes of doctrinal deviance data were extracted from pre-Sebastian Thor era archives. These logs detailed the weaponization of pilgrimage traffic, the forging of indulgence writs, and the artificial generation of miraculous omens using low-grade xenotech illusion engines. None of these systems remain operational. Whether deactivated by the ecclesiarchy or neutralized by the Inquisition remains unclear. One field report, composed by Inquisitorial Auditor Hesk Kor and preserved within the Annulus Silente, describes a series of interviews conducted with palace scribes stationed near the Gate of Souls, a minor portal leading to the reliquary archives. According to Kor, the scribes demonstrated near-identical speech patterns and memory recall, despite being drawn from different sectors and backgrounds. They referred to the Emperor not as a divine being or sovereign ruler, but as the Pulse. When questioned further, each became unresponsive within seconds. Kor later submitted a Vox fragment wherein he stated, "These people are not indoctrinated, they are aligned. Something has harmonized them." His ship suffered a warp core implosion 3 days after leaving Terra. No survivors were recorded. Other investigations have followed subtler lines of inquiry. The Ordo Xenos, traditionally less concerned with domestic imperial sites, opened a case in the year 41,572 following the discovery of non-human alloy traces within a maintenance shaft beneath the palace's upper thermic exhaust towers. the alloys matched no known Xeno's profile. Their atomic lattice was described as chaotically rigid, a contradiction, but one repeated in 3 separate examinations. The Mechanicus claimed the samples were part of a lost Terran alloy batch from the Dark Age. The Inquisition accepted the explanation, but an internal memo classified under Inquisitor Crom Vez details concern that the material exhibited momentary sentience during analysis. It is currently stored within the Vault of Deep Matter on Ordo Xenos Station Theta 9. The Ordo Sicarius also maintains encrypted observation posts within the palace. These are not officially acknowledged, but several internal memos refer to chamber shifts, a phenomenon wherein known locations within the palace interior, some as small as a corridor junction, others as large as whole wings, spontaneously relocate within the structure without construction activity. These shifts do not trigger security alarms, but are detected through inconsistencies in patrol routes, Custodes movement logs, and drone mapping failures. The prevailing inquisitorial hypothesis suggests that the palace does not operate under traditional spatial laws and may, at least in part, be reactive to internal observation. One agent noted, "To know the palace is to move it." Some of the Inquisition's most classified data on the palace is not about the structure itself, but about the behaviour of the Adeptus Custodes. Inquisitorial sensors, passively deployed during routine processions, have recorded patterns of custodian movement that do not correspond to known patrol routes or defence assignments. Entire phalanxes have been seen standing motionless in disused chambers for days at a time, facing walls with no exits or operational significance. Inquisitor Narel Threx, during a covert ethics audit, described one such scene. "They were praying to something I could not see, and they were not speaking low or high Gothic, it was older." The data slate containing this recording was recovered from a decaying servitor 26 years after Threx's disappearance. The palace's surveillance systems had no record of his departure. One of the few known cooperative moments between the Inquisition and the Custodes involved the aftermath of the Rubicon Interdict, an event triggered by the assassination of a palace-based High Lord in 41,900. The Inquisition was granted a corridor of access to investigate the incident, which was later blamed on internal ecclesiarchal conflict. However, cross-comparison of body tissue samples taken from the site suggested that the genetic material did not match any registered human genome. The Inquisition quietly removed the case from the High Lord's docket and sealed it under Ordo Xenos protocol. Several custodes were reported to have entered the chamber following the investigation, but none excited on record. The chamber itself was erased from all architectural diagrams 1 week later. In the case files of Inquisitor Balak Zahn, the palace is referred to as the last living relic. Zahn, a scholar of the Horus Heresy and former Ordo Malleus interrogator, believed that the Imperial Palace was not a structure in the traditional sense, but rather a boundary object, something that exists at the limit of human comprehension, shaped by belief, necessity, and psychic tension. In his final treatise, penned from within a temporary chamber in the Outer Sanctum sector, he writes, "The palace is not being maintained, it is maintaining us. Our rituals are a form of tethering. The Emperor's presence is not a flame, it is a pressure point in reality. The palace is the blister." Zahn vanished from his quarters before his scheduled departure. His identification rosette was later discovered fused into the wall of his cell. The wall showed no signs of cutting, heat exposure, or molecular disturbance. Although rarely acknowledged, inquisitorial agents have gone missing within the palace at a rate 10 times higher than any other Imperial facility of equivalent personnel volume. These losses are not explained through warfare, accident, or even political elimination. They are simply recorded as unrecoverable. Several Ordo Chronos black operations intended to trace these disappearances have ended in identical fashion. No report, no evidence, no transmission, only sudden silence. One such mission was initiated in 42,010. 5 chrono-cloaked operatives, equipped with retrotemporal loggers and new spheric deadman protocols, entered the core maze beneath the Golden Throne. They were tasked with mapping deviations in local temporal density. Their loggers all deactivated the moment they entered the central corridor. 47 minutes later, one was found wandering Sector Varnum, dressed in pre-Unification armour and speaking Middle Technolingua, a dialect dead for over 14,000 years. He expired before translation could be completed. To the Inquisition, the palace remains the most heavily guarded and least understood location in the Imperium, not because of its defences, but because of its nature. It is not a fortress, it is not a shrine, it is not a seat of power, it is a convergence. Everything the Imperium denies, its contradictions, its heresies, its warped logic, converges here, silently and without ceremony. And even the Inquisition, in all its sanctioned omniscience, can only observe from the edges and hope it does not blink. Among the most unsettling discoveries recorded by the Inquisition are the anomalies that appear to exist independently of any known access routes or architectural documentation. These anomalies are not random voids, structural malfunctions, or relics of ancient construction, but fully functional rooms and entire sectors that do not correspond to any registered building phase. One such location, referred to in sealed Ordo Malleus entries as Vault 3 New Veiled, was first encountered by a custodian patrol responding to spatial dissonance alarms in the subthronal strata. The chamber measured exactly 20 by 20 metres, with no door or entry shaft, yet contained a fully operational Lex Archivum of unknown origin, which continuously generated script on living parchment. The text had no discernible language, no repetition, and no end. The moment an inquisitorial translator servitor approached the parchment, it seized and ignited without external stimulus. The custodian leading the patrol immediately sealed the chamber and submitted a silence protocol. Its coordinates were struck from custodial memory banks. The Inquisition's later attempt to relocate the area failed. The floor plans had already changed. In other cases, the Inquisition has documented interactions with what they call residual conscious anchors. These events typically occur in areas of the palace where historical trauma has taken root, such as the original passageways used during the Siege of Terra. In the year 41,833, an Ordo Hereticus pair dispatched to investigate repeated personnel breakdowns within the Gate of Echoing Saints encountered a phenomenon in which Vox recordings would capture audio events not experienced by the observers. Over 36 such instances were logged over a standard week. Most were incomprehensible whispering, but 4 were identified as screams in High Gothic, each calling out the name of Malcador. Physical examination revealed no evidence of Vox tampering or warp interference. One report concluded, "The walls are not transmitting echoes, they are remembering." More direct confrontations occurred during the aftermath of the Noctis Null event, an incident the Inquisition classifies as a Tier 6 warp breach within the palace's westmost crypt levels. While public reports attributed the event to a reactor surge, internal Inquisition logs show that an entire inspection team from the Ordo Malleus failed to report following the incident. The only surviving data was recovered from an autonomous Auspex drone that had remained outside the containment zone. Its visual feed displayed a geometric inversion of the corridor's physical structure. Walls bent in non-Euclidean spirals, stairwells folding into themselves, and shadows that persisted even in complete light. The last frame captured by the drone showed an 8-pointed star etched into the floor, not carved but grown, as if the metal had bloomed from within. Even the Order Xenos, normally peripheral to the palace's jurisdiction, has maintained indirect observations due to unclassifiable signals received from within the palace walls. One notable example was recorded in the year 41,960, when a Mechanicus relay array monitoring palace power flow detected a harmonic frequency typically associated with Necrontyr phase technology. This signal lasted for 12 seconds and pulsed at regular intervals, then abruptly stopped. When a combined Mechanicus Inquisition team attempted to trace the source, the signal's timestamp had already been overwritten by internal palace chronomatrons. What remained was a null zone in the data grid. Nothing could be written or read from that sector again. Inquisitor Varen Lek, who supervised the probe, later submitted a sealed report stating, "This was not Necron. This was something watching the Necron." That phrase was later flagged for theological ambiguity and buried under Order Redactionist guidelines. One of the most heavily classified confrontations within the palace involved a null field operative from the Order Malleus, known only by the designation Malchant. He was deployed following an uptick in what were euphemistically labelled non-linear security breaches, incidents where palace systems reported the presence of individuals who did not exist, or whose genetic markers did not match any human strain. Malchant was tasked with observing, and if necessary neutralising whatever force was responsible. His personal chronologue recorded a continuous account for 4 days, after which a single entry was logged, transmitted across a quantum-locked data string. "It knows I know." His transmission signature disappeared 3 minutes later. The palace security logs recorded a simultaneous power flux in 112 sectors. Nothing further was recovered. Other confrontations involved no clear adversary, only the breakdown of human comprehension. One case occurred in the Hollow Annex, a deep palace zone previously believed to be sealed. Inquisitorial investigators found a corridor with no known construction lineage, but with walls inscribed with names, billions of names, spanning from pre-Imperial Terra to active regiments in the current Crusade era. These names were not carved or painted, but interwoven into the metallic structure at the molecular level. When one of the investigators read a name aloud, she collapsed into a catatonic state, remaining unresponsive until her death weeks later. Her brain scans suggested continuous REM sleep. The rest of the team was quarantined under Hypothesis Sigma 3, localized palace-based memory projection. The Inquisition also maintains several suppressed findings regarding the Golden Throne itself, not the Emperor's state, which remains beyond inquisitorial authority, but the area surrounding the device. Some high-level documents report the presence of semi-visible shapes that drift in the peripheral vision of those who approach the sealed inner sanctum. These shapes are described not as warp entities, but as observational filters, entities that seem to adjust or distort the perception of space around them. In one account, a data scribe assigned to a custodial pathway saw 5 custodians walking toward her, though only 2 were actually present, verified by surveillance. Her attempt to step aside for the others resulted in her walking directly into a wall and suffering a fatal cranial injury. The custodians filed no report. The Inquisition only discovered the incident after the body appeared in an unrelated palace morgue, flagged for unusual trauma patterns. There are even darker rumours, records considered too volatile for traditional inquisitorial databases. These are maintained within the vaults beneath St. Antelma's ashes, a sealed record crypt accessed only by Rosette Tier authority across all 3 Ordos. Among these files is a sealed entry labelled The Gilded Reflection, which references a region deep within the palace that mirrors recorded rooms but with minor and slowly increasing deviations. Inquisitors who explored this region reported encountering identical structures with details slightly altered. Banners displaying unfamiliar emblems, statues with new inscriptions, or corridors angled 3 degrees off from standard. In these zones, time was recorded to move slightly faster. One operative's internal clock advanced 3 minutes ahead of the Imperial standard after a 30-second walk. The report ends with a message. "I fear we are not the only Imperium housed here. The palace remembers more than we do." The Inquisition does not claim to control these events. It does not even claim to fully understand them. Its role is containment, observation through denial. Most findings are quarantined and forgotten, or rerouted into false narratives distributed to the wider Imperium. Threats that do not conform to existing doctrinal labels are catalogued as corruption, hysteria, or divine mystery. Field agents trained to identify demonic patterns are often ill-prepared for the palace's subtler distortions, truths that cannot be unlearned, objects that resist context, questions that unmake the one asking them. And yet, the Inquisition continues to watch. because buried within the Imperial Palace, beneath the layers of scripture, data, and ash, lies something older than administration and deeper than faith. It may be the Emperor's anchor, it may be the Imperium's fracture, it may be both. The final fragments of inquisitorial documentation regarding the Imperial Palace reside not in structured archives, but in dispersed fragments, encoded transmissions, recovered servitor logs, corrupted psychic imprints, and field memoirs never formally submitted. These records do not offer a conclusion. They offer loose ends, events without follow-up, operations terminated mid-sentence, and truths omitted even from redacted reports. Together, they imply a final possibility, that the palace is not simply misunderstood, but deliberately misrepresented, and not by an external enemy, but by the Imperium itself. One such suppressed finding was discovered during the Ectoline Dissonance, a period of unexplained psychic interference affecting the inner palace during the 42nd millennium, year 37. Multiple astropaths reported perceiving visions not of the Emperor's glory, but of a throne room empty, unlit, and crumbling. One saw himself sitting on the golden throne, not as a ruler, but as a prisoner, his arms fused to the armrests, his mouth sewn shut. Another described the sensation of being watched by himself, a recursive loop of perception that drove him into fatal seizure. These were dismissed as side effects of warp exposure. However, an internal analysis by the Order Malleus noted that these visions occurred simultaneously across separate sectors, under shielded conditions with no psychic resonance spikes recorded. The final comment in the file read simply, "They were not receiving a vision, they were seeing through." Another classified report, locked under the Order Redactus and known only through an intercepted data slate fragment, details an encounter with an entity self-identified as the Architect. The operative's description is brief, relayed via short-range vox from a palace crawlspace known as Chamber Helion 97. The voice was not heard audibly but understood linguistically, bypassing sensory input. It allegedly stated, "I am the purpose you've forgotten, the flaw beneath your certainty. You built nothing, you inherited a shell." The chamber was purged by the Custodes within 2 hours. The slate was wiped. Only a backup echo remained in a remote inquisitorial substation, discovered decades later during an unrelated audit. No such chamber now exists. At least 3 Ordo agents have independently reported experiencing structural recursion syndrome within the palace, a rare and potentially terminal psychological response in which the brain begins to interpret architectural repetition as language. Corridors become sentences, vaults become syntax. Doors are interpreted not as physical objects but as statements, commands, or questions. The effect compounds over time. Victims exhibit obsessive mapping behavior, speaking in geometric riddles and diagrammatic poetry until neurological collapse. Affected agents are typically terminated and expunged from the record. But one, designated Inquisitor Silum of the Pale Branch, survived long enough to transmit a final message. The palace is reading us. There are also persistent whispers of a hidden level, unacknowledged by either the Administratum or Mechanicus, referred to in some records as the quiet floor, not lower than the throne, but adjacent to it or inside it, depending on the source. Custodes deny its existence. Mechanicus refused to discuss it, but occasional sensor anomalies and sealed security reroutes suggest its presence. One Inquisitor, granted temporary access to a vault beneath the Sanctum Solis, found that every elevator panel contained a blank 13th button. The other floors were clearly labelled. The 13th showed no icon, no illumination. It could not be pressed. Yet one night, after an unplanned power loss, that button was lit. No one pressed it. It turned off 2 minutes later. The Inquisitor did not report the incident, but his personal notes recorded, "It waited for the right absence." The strongest theory among senior Inquisition archivists is that the palace is home to a crypto system, an unknown mechanism or sentience, either human, post-human, or wholly other, responsible for maintaining the equilibrium of the Imperium in ways no official structure could explain. Some believe it to be a failsafe installed by the Emperor or Malcador, meant to guide the Imperium beyond the collapse of central leadership. Others argue it is a side effect of the throne's prolonged operation, a mutation of Imperial architecture brought about by perpetual warp exposure and recursive ritual. A few, speaking only off record, claim it is a prison for something older than Terra itself. The Inquisition has investigated multiple incidents where agents were reportedly absorbed into the palace without death or injury. In each case, individuals walked into corridors, chambers, or open voids and were never seen again. These locations remained physically present but would no longer permit entry. They had not collapsed but shifted. Records of these people were sometimes intact. In other cases, their identities had been erased from the personnel registries as if they had never existed. These are termed architectural host events. Custodians encountering such phenomena are instructed to leave the area immediately and report nothing. Even the Inquisition's higher security protocols fail to hold when addressing one final recurring anomaly, what is known in limited circles as the Double Palace. This is not a duplicate structure, but a mirrored version of the Imperial Palace seen through unexplained means. A handful of sanctioned psychers, usually on the verge of burnout, claim to see another palace layered over the real one, cleaner, darker, and moving. In this version, banners are unfamiliar, and the throne glows blue instead of gold. Servitors speak backwards, all doors are open, and most disturbingly, no humans are present, only watchers. These visions are dismissed as delusion, but pattern analysis shows a growing number of such cases during warp surges and fluctuations in the Astronomican's power. Ordo Chronos specialists believe the Double Palace may be a temporal echo, a collapsed possibility, or a concurrent version of the Imperium where the heresy ended differently. Others believe it to be a psychic camouflage, something reflecting what viewers expect until it forgets what that is. Theories vary. What is certain is that agents exposed to the Double Palace never return the same, if they return at all. At the end of all these sealed reports, amidst failed attempts to define, map, or contain the palace, one final entry appears repeatedly in separate logs, written by different hands across centuries, sometimes scribbled on margins, sometimes encoded in footnotes. Always the same phrase: "The palace is not our capital, it is our confession." To the Inquisition, the Imperial Palace remains the Imperium's greatest blind spot, not because it is unseen, but because it is seen too often, by too many eyes, from too many angles, over too many centuries. Its form has been reshaped by faith, paranoia, bureaucracy, war, and silence. It holds the Emperor, and it holds everything the Imperium does not want to admit. It is a reliquary, a labyrinth, a wound, and a lie, fused into one, and as long as it endures, so too does the Imperium, uncertain, incomplete, and unwilling to know what truly lies beneath its throne.